As we venture further into Genesys format, we have yet another XYZ based deck to cover, that being Madolche. This entire core is costing you 0 points, and with that you have a lot of flexibility. And today we'll be covering the combo variant with the Vernusylphs. Let's jump into it. Starting with the main deck, I have 3 copies of Madolche Mageline. On summon, Mageline can add as any Madolche monster from our deck to our hand. This makes her a great combo piece with our Vernusylphs, but also a 1-card starter on her own, in that we can add Petting Scizor. Then for other 1-card starters, which is a theme in this deck, 3 copies of Madolche Angeli. Madolche Angeli can be tributed to summon any Madolche from our deck. That monster can't die by battle, however it is shuffled back into your deck at the end phase of your next turn, but this is a great way to tutor any of our Madolches from the deck, usually being the Hoot Cake. As he cannot die by battle, summoned off Angeli, we're more likely to have follow-up for the next turn. Then I have 3 copies of Madolche Petting Scizor. This is one of the newer Madolches, and the effect is absolutely broken. It is a 1-card starter without a normal summon, pairs greatly with the Vernusylphs, and allows us to do our best combo, which is summon Madolche Pudding Cess from the deck, reducing its level by 1, so we can make our broken, non-once per turn combo enabler. I will talk about that later. I'm just playing 1 copy of Pudding Cess because she's quite a brick, although the battle phase effect sometimes does come up. This is not a card we want to draw, and usually we just overlay it immediately into a rank 4. And Petting can summon this from the hand, and if it's in the graveyard we can shuffle it back, so 1 is more than enough. Then I have 2 copies of Madolche Hootcake. Hootcake just requires a monster in the graveyard to function. Thus if we hand trap our opponent, or we make some play first and then lead up with normal summoning this, we would be able to use this effect to summon a Madolche from the deck. However, it's not a 1-card starter on its own, and that does make it a bit worse than the rest. Additionally, we don't want to clog on too many normal summons either, so I think just 2 copies of Hootcake is plenty. And then 1 copy of Madolche Mesengelato. You could warrant playing more of this in the main deck, but I chose to have the second one in the side for when I go first. I think the turn 1 end board that you can make with just getting 1 search off Mesengelato is usually enough. Now there are certain hands which can go through 2 Mesengelato at once in the first turn of the game, even though you just have 1 copy of it. But most of the time you just do it once to get the 1 search for the trap, and then overlay it away for your boss monster. But that's it for the Madolche monsters. Then for the supportive pieces, I have 3 copies of Vernusylph of the Misting Seedlings. The Vernusylphs are incredible extenders for the Madolche deck, and this one's even a starter, being able to grab us Angeli or Petting Scizor from the deck. And this duck is the best one of them. Then I have 2 copies of Flourishing Hills, and 2 copies of Thawing Mountains. These have a similar effect to the duck, but instead the fairy searches you any Vernusylph, and the bear draws you a card. I felt 7 of these were a good ratio. You could certainly play more of them. There's 2 other Vernusylph names that I don't play as well. Their effects are a bit worse than these though, and that's why I decided not to include them. Also, an issue with these is that they're very weak to draw on Lockbird, as they all have the pitch to then search or draw a card. If you're drawled, you can't activate their effects. A card that Madolche usually can play quite well under. As such, I didn't want to rely my deck entirely on the Vernusylphs, although they are very powerful. They're cards that immediately lose the Dimensional Shifter, which albeit the Madolches usually do too. But loading up on too many Vernusylphs could hurt you in the long run, despite being great starters and extenders in a vacuum. Then I have the Shizu Shufflers in 3 copies of Keldo and 1 copy of Medora. These can be summoned from the hand by pitching an Earth Fairy, and the reason why I play 3 copies of Keldo is because it can search Medora from our deck to the hand. These cards are just 1 point each, so they're not very costly for Genesys formats. And depending on the metagame, having Shufflers can be really good. Against something like Vanquish, these cards aren't really doing anything. But if we enter into a metagame where there's a lot of graveyard aligned decks, then having readily searchable extenders, which are also non-engine, and beat board breakers because they're graveyard effects, can be really good. And also, they're fairies, so they work perfectly with the 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light that I also play. Most of the monsters in this deck are fairies, and Orange Lights can negate problem cards like Dimensional Shifter, or just be good non-engine to back up our board, or negate your combo when we go second. Do keep in mind that Petting Scizor needs an empty grave of monsters to summon herself from the hand. As such, if you open Orange Light, a fairy, and a Petting Scizor, unless the fairy is a shuffler so you can banish it to put the Orange Light back into your deck, you may want to start by summoning the Petting Scizor, and then use the Orange Light on something on their board to negate it. But other than that, when we draw the Orange Light and we can use the effect, negating and destroying a monster is very powerful, something that only Cypherm Gear Gamma can do as a hand trap, which is a fairly costly card in Genesys format and limited in the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG. Additionally, hand traps have a bonus effect in this deck, and that is if we can make Madolche Teacher Glass Souffle, and we have our field spell up, Madolche Chateau. we can use the teacher to shuffle back 2 monsters in the graveyard, that being a fairy and an orange light, for example. And then thanks to Madolche Chateau, we can just add those cards to the hand. And thus, we have an infinitely recyclable orange light for the rest of the game. But that's it for the fairies. Then for the last monster in the main deck, I have 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. Madolche is very good against slow decks. It can grind near infinitely, and snowballs very quickly after turn 1. However, the combo decks can be an issue. You can't really fight through the board optimally if their engine just has too many ways to remove your monsters. Now, Madolche does have some extenders, but a lot of the cards are printed quite long ago, and thus they don't have the same characteristics of modern day cards. For example, normal summon Angeli and they just Book of Moon it. It can be quite hard to extend from there. As such, we want our non-engine to be very strong and actually stop our opponent in their tracks. I have tried different variants of Madolche with regular hand traps like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Effect Veiler and Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion and such. However, these hand traps usually don't stop our opponent outright, and thus we may be down to only 4 cards in our hand. And extenders like Vernusylphs don't really function when our hand is nearly empty. As such, I decided to build Madolche for this version of Genesys Format as a more combo, mid-range deck, where I just want to try to push through my combo against what they have. Now, if the format changes up a bit, or perhaps there's some differences in the points, to where we could then change completely how the deck plays. There are different ways to play Madolche for sure, but the way I choose to build it right now is with Pot of Extravagance, as we can play 3 of each of the Madolche extract monsters. Banishing 6 and drawing 2 with Extrav is usually a good trade for you, as this card gives us more cards in the hand to use with the Vernusylphs, or with Herald of Orange Light. A Pot of Greed in this deck is very good. And then to go along with that theory and pushing my plays through, I have 3 copies of Called by the Grave. Now these are currently at 20 points each, which is pretty costly. However, having Called by the Grave to negate Dimensional Shifter, Droll and Lockbird, or if people choose to play cards like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in their deck, Effect Veiler, these regular hand traps as well. Coupling that with the fact that Called by can also negate their engine monsters if they're in the graveyard. Again, pretty format dependent. But if you expect to play a metagame where there's a lot of graveyard-reliant decks, which most modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks are at this point, then the Madolche deck is actually very well situated in the metagame, with its engine costing 0 points. Your deck is pretty interchangeable for the metagame, and the core of Madolche can be quite flexible. You can play more engine cards that have a better grind game or are better going first, or you can play less of the Madolches and play more of the Vernusylphs. So irregardless of how the metagame shapes up, and future point lists, I'm confident to say Madolche will be a strong strategy in this format. Then for the last cards in the main deck, I have 1 copy of Salon, 1 Chateau, 1 Ticket, and 1 Promenade. This is the bare minimum to have a great grind game with the Madolche deck. Now, going second, you can definitely take out some of these, usually being the Salon and the Promenade, or perhaps even the Ticket, depending on the matchup you're playing against. However, against a lot of decks, you do keep all of these in when you go second, because Genesys Format can be so grindy. It doesn't matter as much if you're going first or second, you still will need certain engine pieces to be able to play your combo out, and have enough gas in the tank for the following turns. And as long as your opponent is not FTKing you, most decks are pretty reasonable in what they can end on. As such, you grabbing a Promenade going second, and having a disruption into the board when you go second actually does come up. This isn't modern Yu-Gi-Oh where all the meta decks can end on infinite follow-up, and well, near infinite disruptions as well. Genesys Format is more fair and balanced, and that is why a deck like Madolche can actually thrive. But you do need to know when to side these cards out, and when to keep them in. But that's it for the main deck. It is 40 cards. Then for the extra deck, I have 1 copy of Cicada King, one of the better generic rank 3s in the format. It's not something you summon very often, but you can overlay a Hoot Cake and a Mistling Seedlings for it. Do keep in mind that Madolche putting Cesura locks you into only summoning Madolches, and the Vernusylphs lock you into only activating Earth monster effects. But as long as you're not locked, the Cicada King can be a great card. Then I have 3 copies of Madolche Teacher Glass Souffle. You never actually summon 3 of this, it is only for Pot of Extravagance, which will be a reoccurring theme in this extra deck. Then I have 3 copies of Madolche Queen Tiramisu. Back in 2012, from Abyss Rising, Madolche Queen Tiramisu was the best rank 4 ever created for an archetype. And arguably, that still holds true today, at least for a going second card. Being able to non-target shuffle back 2 of your opponent's cards, and recycle your resources is absolutely phenomenal. The only downside though is that it's not a quick effect, so it only works on your turn when your opponent has cards on the field. However, in Infinite Forbidden, they printed Madolche Queen Tiara Fraise, which is just Tiramisu on the opponent's turn. The Glass Souffle is a good end piece, in that you can shuffle back cards in the graveyard. It's very good against certain decks like Tearlaments. But in Genesys format, monster removal on the field is way more important, and thus ending on a Tiara Fraise, on top of a Tiramisu, is usually your turn 1 board. And then our combo enabler in the extra deck, 3 copies of Madolche Puddingses, Chocolat a la mode. This is very useful for a turn 1 combo, and there are certain games where we actually go for multiples of this, as it's not once per turn to summon. If you have other exceeds, you can just slap this on top of it. Do keep in mind that it does require Puddingses to be under it, to get the bonus effect of summoning from the deck, but still, being a 2000 beat stick, or 3000 under Chateau, is nothing to be scoffed at. Then for the utility force, I have 1 copy of Tornado Dragon and 1 copy of Redoer. Because of Pot of Extravagance, I'm maxing out on all of the Madolche XYZs, and the utility cards rarely come up, but there is a neat combo for Time Thief Redoer, which we'll talk about in the side deck. But that's it for the extra deck. Then for the side, I have 3 copies of Flying Sea. Flying Sea currently costs 0 points, and is a great floodgate against XYZ based decks. And similar to other hand traps, if we have Glass Souffle in Chateau, we're able to infinitely recycle the Flying Sea. So even if they can stunt or OTK, we can just floodgate them back the following turn. Then I have the second copy of Madolche Messengelato. When I go first post side, I want to ensure that my combo is good enough through board breakers. Cards like Ultimate Slayer, sending a Valon, or an Aggregator can be incredibly strong against your turn 1 board. As such, I want to ensure that my combo gives me enough follow-up to actually win the game on the following turn. But I don't want to main deck all of those cards because when I go second, they're just gonna be dead cards. And again, I mainly think you need to do the full combo when you actually play against board breakers, which are usually gonna be in their deck post side. Then I have 2 copies of Nibiru, the Primal Being. Now Nib does cost 10 points each. However, with the way the format looks right now, pretty much no one is playing around this card. As such, you can really catch people off guard with the Nib. And since Madolche is an XYZ based deck as well, people may side in Flying Sea against you. And if you go first and they Flying Sea you, you may want to have a Nib to stunt them in their combo. And also the Nib would tribute the Flying Sea. As such, you won't be locked for the following turn. And then to go along with that, I also have 2 copies of Final Bringer of End Times. This is just a generic spot removal card. However, it is very good in that you can actually out your own Flying Sea with it. You can of course use this in a pinch, sack away your own Madolche to pop a card, which isn't very beneficial, but I suppose it's not a horrible trade either. You could of course dodge various effect negations like Effect Veiler on your Madolches by sacking them away with the Final Bringer of End Times. But the main use for this is to actually out the Flying Sea, and also be an okay card when they don't have Flying Sea as well. And costing 0 points, it's a bit better than Book of Moon, which currently is quite expensive in Genesys format. Then I have 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, a great way to deal with back row, or any pesky threat your opponent may have. Then I have 1 copy of Madolche Dessert. This is actually another out to Flying Sea. Flying Sea states that you can't XYZ summon when this is on your field. However, Dessert is just a special summon, so you can use this under Flying Sea. You could also Chain Link 2 or higher, activate Dessert, bounce your own Flying Sea and your Madolche monster. And when you do this to summon an XYZ, that card will be summoned at Chain Link 2 or higher. As such, they can't use Flying Sea because it'll miss the timing. And then, if you have various level 4s from the field from last turn, you can make a Tiramisu to just clear away what they have, and it's not that bad if they give you a Flying Sea at that point. Additionally, the graveyard effect of Dessert is actually pretty neat. The main use is of course to attach to an XYZ monster you control, but it does not have to attach to Madolche XYZ. As such, if you can make a Time Thief Redoer, and you can shuffle back a Madolche and then attach the Dessert under Redoer, you have the Phoenix Wing Wind Blast type of effect from Redoer, which is very strong to have every single turn of the game. But again, I'm not maining the Dessert because I don't want to have too many Madolche spell and traps in the main deck. And the last card in my side deck is 3 copies of Magic Deflector. From my testing on Dueling Book, there's been a lot of Radiant Typhoon recently, and Magic Deflector is a great floodgate costing you 0 points. Additionally, if people play decks like Monarchs or Pearly, it has great overlap against those too. And whilst you shut off your own Madolche spells for the opponent's turn, if they're passing back, it hardly matters. But that's it for the side deck. What do you guys think about Madolche in Genesys format? Do you like the version with Extravagance and the Shizu cards, with a higher emphasis on the engine cards? Or do you prefer a hand trap route with Effect Veiler and Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring? Let me know in the comments, but until we see each other again, thank you for watching and have a good rest of your day. If you enjoy my content, make sure to also subscribe to my second channel, linked in the description box down below. There I'll be posting more personalized and exclusive content.